Okay, so today we shall look at one more aspect of a resonator cavity before we go to a general relativistic description of Dirac's equation in curved space time. You have a cavity of an arbitrary shape like this, arbitrary cross section. So here we introduce, this is the z direction, and here you introduce curvilinear coordinates q1, q2, right, orthogonal curvilinear coordinate system you introduce here, q1, q2 and z. So you assume this orthogonal curvilinear system has been introduced so that the boundary of this cavity becomes q1 equal to constant, and if h1 h2 denote the Lamy coefficients, that means h1 is dou x by dou q1 square plus dou y by dou q1 square over half, and h2 is dou x by dou q2 square plus dou y by dou q2 square power half. These are the Lamy coefficients. Then we can write down the gradient operator as z cap dou by dou z plus q1 cap by h1 dou by dou q1 plus q2 cap by h2 dou by dou q2. So q1 and q2 fall in the xy plane, h1 and h2 are functions of q1 and q2, and it is derived very simply by using the fact that the unit vector along the q1 direction is given by dou r by dou q1 divided by dou r by dou q1 mod, say you can say qk by mod dou r by dou qk, k equals 1 2. These are the unit vectors along the qk directions. For example, in the case of a plane polar system, plane polar coordinate system, you write x is equal to rho cos phi, y equal to rho sin phi, and z equal to z. So you choose q1 as rho and q2 as phi. Then you get the cylindrical coordinate system. In general, you choose an orthogonal curvilinear coordinate system to calculate the modes for any given shape of the boundary of the cavity, and you can also use the fact that qk, since it is an orthogonal curvilinear coordinate system, if you look at the constant surface as qk equal to constant and look at the normal direction to that, then that gives you the unit vector along that direction, right. So these two expressions are equal. From this you can deduce this formula for the gradient. Likewise, you have, in fact, you can derive formulas for the curl of a vector field, or the gradient of a vector field, or the divergence of a vector field, or the Laplacian of a vector field in any orthogonal curvilinear coordinate system with simple expressions. So as we saw, in such a cavity, you could write by writing the electric field as a function of q1 q2 z, which is equal to E1 into q1 cap plus E2 into q2 cap plus E3 into z cap. So q1 cap and q2 cap lie in the xy plane. So this is nothing but E perpendicular, the transverse component of the electric field, and this is the longitudinal component Ez z cap. Likewise for the magnetic field. Then you could derive using Maxwell's equations as usual, del cross E is equal to del perpendicular Ez cross z cap plus del perpendicular cross E perpendicular plus z cap cross dou E perpendicular by dou z, and wherever a derivative with respect to z comes, there you put a multiplication factor of gamma minus gamma. Likewise for the magnetic field, and when you equate the components, you get, as usual, after making the usual algebraic manipulations, you get E perpendicular, which is equal to E1 into q1 cap plus E2 into q2 cap is equal to minus gamma by h square del perpendicular Ez cross z cap minus j omega mu by h square del perpendicular or del perpendicular Ez plus del perpendicular hz cross z cap. So if you equate coefficients on both sides, you get that the E1 component is of course a function of Q1 and Q2. That is, E1 is along the Q1 cap direction. E1 becomes, in component form, the same equation. I am writing it down, gamma by h square into dou Ez by dou Q1. That is what is del perpendicular, and then you divide by h1, and then you take Q1 cap. So here you are using the formula that del perpendicular is nothing but Q1 cap by h1 dou by dou Q1 plus Q2 cap by h2 dou by dou Q2, where h1 and h2 are the Lamy coefficients. So this and then you use the fact that plus j omega mu by h square. Now if you take the cross product with z, you have to use the fact that Q1 cap, Q2 cap, z cap form a right-handed orthogonal right-handed coordinate system. So that Q1 cap cross Q2 cap is z cap, Q2 cap cross z cap is Q1 cap, and z cap cross Q1 cap is Q2 cap. So if you look at Q2 cap cross z cap, that will give you dou hz by dou Q2. So essentially Q1 is equal to constant is the boundary, and Q2 cap is normal to the boundary of the cavity of the resonator. Similarly, if you look at E2, what do you get? E2 is equal to minus gamma by h square. Then here you have dou Ez by dou Q2 by dou Q2, and then dou by dou Q2, Q2 cap cross z cap, Q2 cap cross z cap is Q1 cap. So that will give you minus j omega mu by h square into dou hz by dou Q2. Into, of course, you will have to put an h2 factor on the denominator, or rather you put a dou Ez by dou E1 plus dou hz by dou Q2 by h2, and E2 is dou Ez by dou Q2, you have to divide by h2, and here you have dou hz by dou Q1, Q1 cross z cap is minus Q2, so it will be plus h1 will come out in the denominator. So in principle you can find out the transverse components of the electric field in terms of the longitudinal components by differentiating with respect to the curvilinear system Q1 and Q2 and taking into account the Lamy's coefficients at each of these points. Similarly for H2, and then when you look at the last equation, del perpendicular cross E perpendicular is minus j omega mu hz z cap, and del perpendicular cross H perpendicular is equal to j omega epsilon Ez z cap. So this when you substitute for E perpendicular and H perpendicular, there are expressions given in terms of the longitudinal components. Because you can do it in a coordinate free way, then you get del perpendicular square plus H square acting on Ez equal to 0, and del perpendicular square plus H square acting on Hz is 0, where your del perpendicular square is the Laplacian. So it will be 1 by h1 h2 dou by dou q1 h2 by h1. So acting on any function psi plus dou by dou q2 h1 by h2 psi, where psi is any function of q1 and q2. This is the formula for the Laplacian in the orthogonal curvilinear coordinate system. So your Ez and Hz satisfy now very simple equation, namely del perpendicular square in the curvilinear system plus H square acting on Ez is 0. So first to consider the TM mode in which Hz is 0, then everything is given in terms of Ez, and then you apply the boundary condition that this is the resonator cavity, this boundary is q1 equal to constant c naught. So you can say that Ez at q1, when you say Ez is a function of q1 and q2, so when you put q1 equal to c naught and at arbitrary q2, that is 0, that becomes a tangential component of E vanishing on the boundary for a perfect electric conducting surface. Likewise, for a perfect magnetic conducting surface, the normal component is 0, that means H2 is the normal component, q2 is normal to this direction, this is q2 cap, this is q1 cap. So H2 is 0 when q1 equal to c naught and arbitrary q2, and you take you look at the q2th component, that must be 0 on the boundary. right. So if you express your H perpendicular in terms of, if you express H perpendicular in terms of Ez and Hz, these boundary conditions will become simply dou Hz by dou Q2, dou Q2 that is 0 when Q1 is C0. The normal derivative of Hz along the boundary is 0. You can see it from this immediately. You see you have H perpendicular is equal to minus gamma by H square del perpendicular Hz plus J omega epsilon by H square del perpendicular Ez cross Z cap. So you get H2 which is same as HQ2 that is to be 0 minus gamma by H square dou Hz by dou Q2 plus J into H2 plus J omega epsilon by H square into H1 into dou Ez by dou Q1 cross Z cap with a negative sign. So if this is to vanish at Q1 equal to constant, namely on the boundary, the normal component of the magnetic field is to vanish on the boundary, then dou Hz by dou Q2 should be 0 when Q2 is 0, when Q1 is C0. Dou Ez by dou Q1 will anyway be 0 because Ez is 0 on the boundary. You have already put that boundary condition. So Ez is 0 on the boundary, its differential along Q1 will also be 0 on the boundary because Q1 is tangential to the surface. So this becomes 0, so you get the condition that dou Hz by dou Q2 should vanish on the boundary. That is the Neumann condition for Hz, whereas the Dirichlet condition for Ez. So once you do that, for if you take a TM mode, then everything is derived from Ez alone. So you have a set of, you have to solve this eigenvalue problem, Ez equal to 0 with the boundary condition that Ez when Q1 equal to C equal to 0. So this is the Dirichlet boundary condition. Let us say this has got eigenvalues Hn square. Let us say Hen square, Hen square, n equals 1, 2 and so on. These are the modal eigenvalues. Similarly for the Neumann condition you will have, if you have a TE mode, then everything is derived from Hz. So you will have this plus H square acting on Hz is 0 and Hz at Q1 equal to 0, Q1 equal to C0, no, dou Hz by dou Q2 by at Q1 equal to C0, that is 0. So you get a Neumann condition, Neumann boundary value problem, and let us say its eigenvalues are H n square, H for the magnetic field, n equals 1, 2 and so on. In the case of a rectangular waveguide or a rectangular resonator cavity, we have seen that both these expressions, both these eigenvalues are the same, namely m square pi square by s square plus n square pi square by b square. Anyway, so you get different modes, and let us say the corresponding orthogonal eigenfunctions are un. So let us call this as ue n at q, where q means q1 q2. Let us say these are the normalized eigenfunctions. Since del perpendicular square is a Hermitian operator, it is a Hermitian operator with the Dirichlet boundary conditions. How do you show that it is a Hermitian operator? Simply look at del perpendicular square psi and phi integral dq1 dq2, so d2q over the boundary d. So if you integrate by parts, you can write this as you can write this minus integral psi del perpendicular square phi d2q on d, that is equal to integral phi dou psi by dou n, which is dou psi by dou q2 minus psi dou phi by dou q2. Okay, this is not d2q, the area measure has to be used here, right? So you have to put an h1 h2 d2q. Here also you should put a h1 h2 d2q, because the area measure is h1 dq1, that is the length element, into h2 dq2, which is h1 h2 dq2, where h1 h2 are the Lamy coefficients, right? So if you look at this, I call the area measure as ds. So you have the relation by Green's theorem, you have phi del perpendicular square psi minus psi del perpendicular square phi ds is equal to over the boundary surface, over the boundary curve. Okay, S is the boundary curve. This is phi times dou psi by dou q2 minus psi times dou phi by dou q2, dou psi by dou q2. This is not the boundary curve, this is the bounding surface, right? So you are, this is the cross sectional surface S in the q1 q2 plane, and this is the, and gamma is this boundary, gamma is the shape of this boundary in the q1 q2 system. So dou, and then you put a dl. dl is the length element along the boundary, that is h1 dq1. h1 dq1 is dl. No, it is h1 dq1 h plus h2 dq2, but q2 is not, q1 is equal to constant. So you put, I think I made a mistake. The boundary should be q1 is equal to constant, and just a small error I have made here. The boundary curve is q2 equal to constant, q2 equal to c0, not q1 equal to c0. So q1 is the tangent to this boundary. So your Dirichlet boundary conditions are Ez at q2 equal to c0, that should be 0, and dou hz by dou q2, the normal derivative at q2 equal to c0, that should be 0. These are the boundary conditions, corresponding to which the modal eigenvalues are hen square, and here it is hhn square, n equals 1, 2 and so on. And if you look at any two, if you look at two functions, say phi del perpendicular square psi minus psi del perpendicular square phi ds over the q2 surface, that is phi dou psi by dou q2, normal direction is q2, right? q2 is equal to c0, you get the boundary, and the tangential direction is q1. So phi dou psi by dou q2 minus psi dou phi by dou q2, q2 dl along the boundary curve. Now if you apply the Neumann boundary conditions to phi and psi, then dou psi by dou q2 becomes 0 on the boundary, and dou phi by dou q2 becomes 0 on the boundary, so this becomes 0. So you get the equality of these two expressions, showing that del perpendicular square is Hermitian. If you apply the Dirichlet boundary condition, then phi and psi will vanish on the boundary, so again in that case also this will be 0. So in both cases del perpendicular square is a Hermitian operator for both the kinds of boundary conditions that we consider. So you get two different eigenvalues, but the eigenfunctions will be orthogonal, because you can make them orthonormal because of the fact that del perpendicular square is a Hermitian operator. You see, if you have del perpendicular square plus h square n acting on, let us say, UEN q, that is 0 on the boundary, and you have del perpendicular square plus h square m for a different m acting on UEM at q is 0. So I multiply this equation by UEM at q and integrate. Then what do I get? If I integrate, I can integrate by parts and bring this here after applying the boundary condition that u acts on this to give 0. So this will give immediately h square n minus h square m multiplied by integral, you can say bar if you want to put here, UEM q bar UEN q, okay, ds, this is 0, and since hn square is not equal to hm square, these two will become orthogonal to each other. That is, the different modes are orthogonal. Likewise the TE and TM modes are also orthogonal, you can prove that very easily. So the picture becomes clear now. Your general electric field, the general form of the electric field is q1 q2 z at a given frequency, and that will be summation Cn. You can put a constant, a set of constants, which is Ce n UEN q into exponential minus gamma En z. This is the propagation constant, and likewise Hz of q1 q2 z, which is equal to summation Chn UHn q multiplied by exponential minus gamma Hn z summed over n, where your omega square epsilon mu plus Hen square is equal to this plus gamma square, gamma En square is equal to Hen square, and likewise omega square epsilon mu plus gamma Hn square is equal to Hhn square. Right, these are the propagation constants. You can get the cutoff frequency and everything in the usual way. Now when you go to the quantum picture, anyway, you can also calculate other things like the power dissipated in the cavity and so on. For example, if you want to find out the power dissipated in the side walls, let us say it has got a finite conductivity Z, then there will be a surface current induced by N cross H tangential. Right, this will be the surface current, and your N cap is taken as Q2 cap because Q2 cap is normal to the boundary. This is Q2 cap cross H cap, H, which is equal to Q2 at the boundary. So this will be Q2 cap cross H1 Q1 cap plus H2 Q2 cap plus H3 HZ Z cap. Here H1 and H2 are not the Lamy coefficients, they are the components of the magnetic field along the Q1 cap and Q2 cap directions. So Q2 cap cross Q1 cap is minus Z cap. So you can say that Js is nothing but on the boundary, it is nothing but minus H1. Q2 cap cross Q1 cap is minus Z cap. So H1 Z cap, Q2 cap cross Q2 cap is 0, Q2 cap cross Z cap is Q1 cap. So this is plus HZ Q1 cap on the boundary, that is evaluated at Q2 equal to C0. So now you want to see how much power is dissipated. You know that from basic Maxwell's equations that the propagation constant for in a conducting medium is given by the you can derive the equation from Maxwell's equation if you use say del cross E is equal to minus j omega mu h, and del cross h is equal to sigma plus j omega epsilon E. If you use these two equations along with the fact that del dot h and del dot E are 0, you get the propagation equation as del square E and del square h, right. So del square E comma h is equal to gamma square, which is j omega mu into sigma plus j omega epsilon multiplied by E and h. So the propagation constant is this, we call as gamma square, and its square root gives you its square root will have an imaginary part and will have a real part in the imaginary part. The real part will correspond to attenuation along the z direction, the imaginary part will correspond to propagation. So for high conductivity, sigma much greater than omega epsilon, at that frequency your gamma square becomes approximately simply equal to, gamma becomes approximately equal to root j omega mu into sigma, right, which is omega mu sigma root into 1 plus j by root 2. So this is by 2. It means that alpha, this is alpha plus j beta, where alpha equal to beta is equal to root omega mu sigma by 2. So you can see that it will propagate inside a conductor according, it will attenuate according to e power minus alpha z. E power minus j beta z does not cause attenuation, its magnitude becomes 1. So this is the attenuation, where alpha is given by this in the case of high conductivity. In the general case you have to calculate alpha plus j beta as the square root of j omega mu into sigma plus j omega epsilon, real part and the imaginary part. And if you look at the side walls of the cavity, it will let us say you are looking at the decay of the current is proportional to the electric field, so that will also decay according to e power minus alpha z. So if the surface current on the surface is Js, then Js decays as e power minus alpha z at a given frequency. So you can see that the total power dissipated per unit length, right. If you look at J, let us say J is the current density, not the surface current density. So J depends on the J at the, it will become something like J at the surface into e power minus alpha z, and you use Ohm's law to calculate mod J square by 2 sigma as the total power dissipated per unit volume. And if you integrate along dq, this is here instead of z I should put q2 because q2 is the length, actually I should put h2 q2. So let us call this h2 q2 as d of some depth which I call as xi. So mod j square by 2 sigma e power minus 2 alpha xi d xi, right, that is the total power dissipated per unit length. That means that power dissipated per unit area, you see you take a unit area here on the surface and you go in depth inside according to the length, according to the parameter xi. So if you integrate over all xi, I get the mod j square by 2 sigma. Mod j square by 2 sigma is the average power dissipated per unit length. That is because the power dissipated per unit volume is J dot E, right, E dot J, and and by Ohm's law, since the conductivity is high, E is equal to J by sigma, or equivalently J equal to sigma E, and you take a half factor because they are all sinusoidally varying with time, you take time averages, so that half factor comes from there. So this gives you the power dissipated per unit area on the boundary surface. So this will become mod J square on the surface divided by 4 alpha sigma, right, and I can write, and where your J, this is the power dissipated per unit, the power dissipated per unit area. But you know one thing, note one thing, if you look at J itself per unit area, what is the current per unit length? It is J d psi, it is J d psi, this is the current per unit length, surface current per unit length, where J is the volume current density inside the conductor. Because per unit length, if you want to know how much is there, you have to integrate out per unit length. If you integrate out with respect to xi, it will give you the total length into the length along the normal xi, that is the area, and the total current through this area is J d psi. Okay, if I take a unit length here, 1 into xi is the area, or if you take a length L here along the z direction and you take xi is the normal, then L into xi is the area, and if you multiply with the current density, that gives you the total current. So if you integrate over all xi, I get the current per unit length, which is the surface current, and this is nothing but J e power integral J on the surface into J on the surface e power minus gamma xi d xi, which is J naught by gamma, right. So in place of J0 I substitute, I will substitute gamma into Js, right, which is nothing but gamma into Q2 cap cross H at the boundary, right. So this of course at 0 0. So in place of J0 is the volume current density per unit, current density is of course per unit area at the surface. So you substitute that into this expression and that into this to get the expression for the power dissipated in terms of the magnetic field on the surface, namely in terms of Hz and in terms of Hz and HQ1, in terms of Hz and HQ1. So this is nothing but 1 by 4 alpha sigma times J naught, that will give you gamma square, mod gamma square into mod H square, mod H tan square, where H tan square, mod H tan square is equal to mod H2 square plus mod Hz square, sorry, mod H1 square plus Hz square. That is, it has got two tangential components, one H1 along the Q1 direction, another Hz along the Z direction. The sum of these two gives you the total power dissipated, and you can get this expression when you calculate the total power dissipated per unit length of the guide. You can also calculate the amount of energy stored. So power per unit length, power dissipated per unit length is equal to 1 by 4 alpha sigma into mod gamma square multiplied by mod J square, which is nothing but H1 square plus Hz square at Q2 equal to C naught on the surface, and this has got of course this will depend on Z also, so you have to integrate out over the whole length to get the total power dissipated over the cavity. This will vary proportional to e power, this will vary with Z as e power minus gamma Z or e power minus the gamma Z, but here you have to use gamma within the conductor. Here this is the propagation constant within the conductor, so your gamma sigma should be taken as J omega mu into sigma plus J omega epsilon over half, right, which is equal to alpha plus J beta. So mod gamma sigma square should be read as alpha square plus beta square by 4 alpha sigma, right. This times mod h1 square plus mod hz square, and it will vary with z as e power minus 2 alpha z or e power minus gamma z. Mod the beta will cancel out, so it will vary as e power minus 2 gamma z. In the case of an attenuation, you are looking at the propagation. Say you are assuming that gamma is purely real. It's only you are looking at the non-propagating mode. In the general case, you will take e power minus alpha 2 alpha z. If you write gamma as alpha plus j beta within the guide, not to be confused with alpha and beta within the conductor. Here I call it alpha sigma beta sigma to distinguish between the two propagation constants, one within the conductor and one within the guide itself. So this will vary as e power minus 2 alpha z, and you can integrate over the entire length of the cavity by putting a dz or equivalently dividing by 1 by 2 alpha further here. Here it is 2 alpha sigma, and here this is the attenuation constant within the cavity. So you can get the Q factor of the guide as power dissipated, or you can say power dissipated per unit length or per unit, you can say power dissipated within the cavity, total power dissipated within the cavity multiplied by the cycle, multiplied by the time period, that is the total energy dissipated per cycle divided by energy stored within the guide, within the cavity. Energy stored within the cavity can be computed very simply. It is simply equal to epsilon by 4 times mod E square plus mu by 4 times mod H square, and then you put ds dz, where ds is h1 h2 dq1 dq2. This is the volume element, and you integrate this house over s cross the length, say 0d. D is the length of the cavity. So and E you can calculate using the formula mod E square is equal to Ez square plus mod E perpendicular square, and similarly for h mod h square you can express it in terms of hz and h perpendicular. So the idea is to get the Q factor entirely in terms of this, and you can of course what happens when you quantize the fields, then what happens is that your CEN, the modes of expansion, they will become operators. So you are writing the modal expansion for the field as e power within the cavity. You will also have to make the assumption that Ex and Ey vanish on the bounding surfaces, right. Ex and Ey, tangential component electric field vanishes on the top boundary as well as on the bottom boundary. On the other hand, Hz vanishes on the top boundary as well as the bottom boundary. So you will have to take cos of p pi z by d, that is the dependence on z, so that dou E by dou z, you see your E perpendicular was what? It was gamma by h square into del perpendicular Ez plus other terms. This gamma can be replaced by a derivative with respect to z. So this is proportional to 1 by h square times del perpendicular dou Ez by dou z. So dou Ez by dou z should vanish on the boundary, which means that you should take gamma as jp pi by d, so that if you differentiate with respect to z, this with respect to z, and put z equal to 0 or d, you will get 0, and then you look at the corresponding oscillation frequencies. So e power j omega, it will depend on n and p. So n and p t corresponding to the electric modes. So you take the real part of this whole expression and you sum this over all n. This is the Ez, the z component of the electric field, and you can likewise write down the expression for the z component of the magnetic field and calculate the energy in the field as a quadratic form in CEN. So, you see, by using the orthogonality of these eigenfunctions, you have seen earlier that the total energy density can be written as, if you look at similarly the expansions for CHN, you can write them as, you can write it as summation lambda En. It will be a quadratic form if you use the orthogonality of the modes. So, lambda En into CHN square into CEN square plus lambda Hn into mod CHN square summed over n. And to get agreement with quantum mechanics, you make CEN and CHN as annihilation operators, so that this, and then lambda E will automatically adjust in such a way so that when you use the commutation relation or use the fact that CEN varies with time as e power I omega and ENT, right, CENT is equal to CEN into e power minus I omega ENT, right. Likewise CHN T is CHN into e power minus I omega HNT, right, where your omega En, how do you calculate? Omega square epsilon mu plus HEN square plus gamma square plus gamma En square is HEN square. Likewise for the magnetic field. So, and you put for gamma En square, you put omega square epsilon mu minus p pi by d square, jp pi by d you put for gamma En, that is HEN square. It is same as saying that omega En, the possible mode resonant frequencies of oscillation are given by 1 by root epsilon mu into p pi by d square plus HEN square. HEN square. This is the generalization of the formula for the resonant frequencies within a rectangular cavity resonator. In the rectangular cavity resonator, your HEN square gets replaced by n square pi square by a square plus m square pi square by b square. Here you put HEN because you are where HENs are obtained by solving the Dirichlet problem for this curved boundary. So, you will automatically get, you see that if you normalize, if you write down the Hamiltonian in such a way that the Heisenberg equations of motion give you the correct dynamics for CEN, sinusoidal dynamics for CEN, then you will see that your lambda En will become simply omega En, okay, or rather h cross omega En, according to you are taking h cross as 1, and similarly lambda Hn will be omega Hn. That will give you the correct expression for the energy densities within the energy of the field within the cavity. Now, when you want to quantize this, what do? You take both the Dirac field and the Maxwell field and quantize both of them. So, likewise the Dirac field is given by solving dou mu plus Ea mu minus m acting on psi is 0. The same as saying, as we saw last time, alpha comma minus I del plus beta m plus alpha comma Ea plus Ea minus Ea0 E into the scalar potential minus m, okay, that is the total energy plus alpha, let me just erase this. So, this is the energy, this is the Hamiltonian plus beta m, if you multiply both sides by gamma 0, that is what you will get, plus beta into m, okay, that beta into m has been taken care of, and this is the total energy. So, you have to add to this the electrostatic field energy. So, this into psi is equal to I dou psi by dou t. So, you can solve the Dirac equation also by putting the boundary conditions in the absence of the electromagnetic field. When the electromagnetic field is present, then you will have to get correction. So, let us see how to go about doing this problem, and we will take gravity also into account. Things become even more complex, right. So, when gravity is also taken into accounted for. See, in the case of gravity, what happens is that space time becomes curved, and you want your equations of motion to remain invariant under local Lorentz transformations. You see, if you have a gauge theory, if you have a gauge theory of the form, say Dirac's equation like this, gamma mu into I dou mu plus E times A mu alpha tau alpha minus m acting on psi 0, where tau alpha are the Hermitian generators of a gauge group and A alpha mu is a gauge field. Okay, it is a gauge field. So you can write this formally as gamma mu I dou mu plus E A mu minus m acting on psi 0, where A mu takes values in the Lie algebra. A mu takes values in the Lie algebra. So let us say it is SUN, the space of all symmetric and skew symmetric n cross n matrices. Skew symmetric, no, in the case of all the space of all Hermitian, the Lie algebra of SUN, say your gauge group is a subgroup of SUN. So the gauge algebra will be this, and you put Hermitian generators. You put Hermitian generators. So this should be a part of. So you should use skew Hermitian generators, because the Lie algebra of SUN is the space of all skew. SUN is the special unitary group. Its Lie algebra is the set of all matrices which satisfy x star plus x equal to 0. That means skew Hermitian matrices, x star equal to minus x, and trace of x must be 0 because determinant of e power x is 1, special unitary group. So all the Lie algebra of G is the space of all 0 trace matrices which are skew Hermitian, and A mu, and I can write I T alpha here where tau alphas are Hermitian, so that I T alpha tau alpha becomes skew Hermitian. So you can also write the Dirac equation as I gamma mu into dou mu plus E A mu, where A mu is a Lie algebra valued potential minus m acting on psi is 0. Now when I want this to be gauge invariant, locally gauge invariant, like I want local gauge invariance. I want local gauge invariance, which means that if you change psi of x, x is space time, so into gx psi x, where G is an element of the gauge group, Gx is an element of the gauge group G, then simultaneously your A mu will also undergo a gauge transformation. This goes to A mu dash of x in such a way that this equation remains invariant. That means that if let us say this goes to A mu dash x, then this becomes psi gamma mu times dou mu plus E A mu dash at x minus m acting on Gx acting on psi equal to 0. The transformed wave function gauge group transformed wave function should satisfy the transformed wave equation, and that can happen only when G comes to the right. That means you require that Gx acting on dou mu plus E A mu should be nothing but dou mu plus E A mu multiplied by G of x. That is, the potential should be selected in such a way that this transformation property holds good. A mu belongs to the Lie algebra and Gx belongs to the gauge group. A mu belongs to the Lie algebra of the gauge group. So if you do that, you get the desired gauge invariance. That means you require that Gx times dou mu plus E A mu x into Gx inverse is equal to dou mu plus E A mu dash of x. You require this, which is same as saying that Gx into dou mu Gx inverse plus E times Gx A mu x Gx inverse is equal to E times A mu dash of x. Or you can divide by E on both sides and get the gauge transformation. This generalizes the gauge transformation of the U1 group, which is the electromagnetic field. You have an extra term due to non-commutativity, namely G A mu G inverse. This is the gauge transformation of A mu. It ensures that the Dirac equation for or the Yang-Mills field equation, the Dirac equation for the matter wave field in the presence of the Yang-Mills gauge group gauge potentials A mu will be covariant, will be invariant under a gauge transformation. You simultaneously transform the wave function by the local gauge group. So this goes to Gx Ix, and simultaneously you transform Ax, A mu x to A mu dash x. A mu x goes to A mu dash x in accordance to this formula, and you will get a complete invariance under these two of the equation under these two transformations. So the gauge group acts in the adjoint representation on the gauge potentials with an extra correction term, whereas it acts in the ordinary spinor representation acting on, not the spinor representation, it acts on the wave function according to the usual vector representation of the gauge group. So under these two transformations the equations of motion remain invariant. You see, you can look at it this another way. Suppose you have a Lagrangian which is invariant under, Lagrangian is a function of a mu and it is also a function of psi, matter fields and gauge fields, and you require gauge invariance. So let us say this satisfies the condition L of, let us say, okay, the matter part, let us say this appears, psi appears in the combination, dou mu plus Ea mu psi. These two gauge potential and the matter field psi, they appear in this combination, and let us call this function as say chi mu. So L is, let us say, a function of chi mu, and L is gauge invariant. That means L of G chi mu is equal to L of chi mu for all G belonging to the gauge group G. Then it is clear, for this Lagrangian to have local gauge invariance, you require that dou mu plus a mu dash acting on Gx psi, right. If this satisfies Gx multiplied by dou mu plus a mu x multiplied by psi x, then since L is a function of this, L will be a function of this, but G has come outside because it is invariant. So this will be the same as L of dou mu plus Ea mu acting on psi, right. So this will be, for example, if your Lagrangian contains terms like, let us say, psi dagger psi, or it contains psi dagger psi, this will be invariant under the gauge group. Or if it contains something like dou mu plus Ea mu but into psi, and you put a star here, and then you put a dou mu plus Ea mu into psi, right. If you apply a gauge transformation, Gx comes out here, Gx star will come out here, then Gx star, Gx is identity because it is a subgroup of SUN. So if you use the fact, you get an invariant Lagrangian density function. This is the general theory of Yang-Mills generalization of Yang-Mills theory of gauge fields and matter fields and gauge fields, taking into account that the matter field consists of obeys the Dirac equation, but with the gauge group potential, with the gauge potential replacing the usual electromagnetic potential. As a for example, the electroweak theory of Weinberg, Salam and Glashow. Now how do you do this to the gravitational field? When you have gravity, it is described by a metric tensor G mu nu x, and you can use a tetrad notation. You can use a tetrad factorization of this as Ea mu x, Eb nu x, summed over A and B, where eta AB is the Minkowski metric and Ea mu's are tetrad. So the A and B indices transform according to the local Lorentz transformation, whereas the mu and nu indices transform according to diffeomorphisms. So this is called a tetrad. You can also write this equation by raising your by lowering the A and B indices are lowered using the Minkowski metric eta AB, whereas mu and nu indices are raised and lowered using the diffeomorphism transformation. So you can also write this as A mu x into Ea nu x. You can also write this in this way. So it amounts to locally factorizing out the metric at each point in space time into product of such factors. Then you can ask, I want to include gravity, so that you get a diffeomorphism theory of the Dirac equation in an electromagnetic potential, maybe even in a gauge potential. So I use the same formalism as for gauge groups. I introduce a gamma mu term. Gamma mu x is the spinor connection of the gravitational field. Spinor connection of the gravitational field of gravity, spinor connection of gravity. So this replaces the A mu, the gauge potentials. So I replace dou mu by dou mu plus gamma mu. Dou mu plus gamma mu x. This is the covariant derivative. In the Yang-Mills case, the covariant derivative was dou mu plus Ea mu, where Ea mu was a Lie algebra element, and if I call this as the covariant derivative, then you see immediately that the field tensor del mu comma del nu is nothing but dou nu E times dou nu A mu, or rather E times dou mu A nu minus dou nu A mu plus E square times there will be a commutator A mu comma A nu, and this can be expressed in terms of the Lie algebra structure constants by writing A mu as A mu alpha into tau alpha and A mu beta as A nu beta into tau beta, and you take their commutator, you get A alpha mu A beta nu into tau alpha comma tau beta, and you use the structure constants of the gauge group to write tau alpha comma tau beta is equal to I C alpha beta rho tau rho. Skew Hermitian matrix, these are the structure constants. So you can express this. So this gives you the gauge field. And how does del mu transform? Del mu transforms under the gauge, local gauge transformation to Gx del mu Gx inverse, as we just saw. So that if you apply del mu on psi, this will transform to G del mu G inverse G psi. This will cancel out, this will be G del mu psi, which is the correct form you require for getting an invariant Lagrangian. If the Lagrangian, for example, is a quadratic function of del mu psi. Okay, so I need a connection to define a covariant derivative, and what I will do is I can write the Dirac equation as gamma mu times dou mu plus gamma mu into I minus m in the absence of an electromagnetic field. Psi is 0, but this is wrong because gamma mu, what is gamma mu? Gamma mu should, you see, dou mu is transforming according to a diffeomorphism, so you cannot use the constant gamma matrices. Obviously you should take gamma A into E mu A, where E mu A is a tetrad. This is to be interpreted as gamma mu x, because gamma A's are the constant Dirac matrices, okay, and they correspond to Lorentz indices. So if you want to get a diffeomorphism invariant theory, you must use this in place of the gamma mu, and you must use also the connection here. So you can see that the equation becomes I gamma A E mu Ax multiplied by dou mu plus gamma mu x minus m acting on psi is 0. Gamma mu is yet to be determined, the spinor connection is yet to be determined, but see that this has got a diffeomorphism invariance, because under diffeomorphisms what does dou mu go to? Dou mu goes to dou mu bar, right, which is nothing but dou x mu bar by dou x nu into dou nu, and gamma mu is also assumed to transform as a covariant vector. So if you use that, gamma mu will transform to gamma mu bar, which is dou x nu bar by dou x nu into gamma nu. So this whole thing will transform to I gamma A. What will E mu A transform to under diffeomorphisms? Under diffeomorphisms, E mu A will transform to E mu A bar x, which is E rho A x dou x mu bar by dou x rho. So cancellations will take place from E mu, from a covariant, from a contravariant. When you are contracting a contravariant index with a covariant index, it becomes a scalar. So this will be diffeomorphism invariant, because this will go to I gamma A E rho A x dou x mu bar by dou x rho multiplied by dou x nu by dou x mu, I gamma A dou x mu bar by dou x rho, then dou x nu by dou x mu bar into dou nu plus gamma nu, and dou x nu by dou x mu bar into dou x mu bar by dou x rho will give you delta nu rho, right. So this will become delta nu rho, and this will cancel out with this to give dou nu. So you will get a diffeomorphism invariant Dirac equation, but you also want this Dirac equation in curved spacetime to be invariant under local Lorentz transformations. How do you ensure that? So we also require the Dirac equation in curved spacetime to be invariant under local Lorentz transformations. Also this also I require. That means by saying that if you take a local Lorentz transformation lambda x belonging to the Lorentz group, okay. So under this local transformation, local Lorentz transformation, what happens to xa? Xa goes to lambda ab x into xb, or I can also write this as lambda okay, I can bring down the index. I can pull down the index index A or push up the index B using the metric Minkowski metric eta AB. They are both the same, right? 1 minus 1 minus 1 minus 1. So to get invariance under local Lorentz transformation, what do you require now? You take gamma A E mu A into I dou mu plus gamma mu x minus m acting on psi is 0. So here I apply a lambda x, here I apply a local Lorentz transformation lambda x, here I apply another local Lorentz transformation. Actually I should apply the spinor representation of the Lorentz group, right. So a local Lorentz transformation will act according to the spinor representation, and here you have d lambda x inverse and then d lambda x psi, this is 0. So the wave function transforms under local Lorentz transformations to d lambda x into psi x, whereas, so what is the transformation of the wave function? This goes to psi dash, which is d of lambda x into psi x, where d lambda is the spinor representation of the Lorentz group. So what happens to this? This will become d of lambda x into gamma A. I can bring in this d lambda inverse through this, right, but unfortunately it gets differentiated here by dou mu, right. So so what will happen? You can write this as d lambda x gamma A, then you have d lambda x inverse, you put an I here, and here you have dou mu, here you put again a d lambda x, into dou mu. I multiply by d lambda inverse here and bring this inside, commute this inside. E mu A is a scalar, is a set of functions, so I can bring the d lambda here acting on gamma A in the adjoint representation, and here you have d lambda x dou mu plus gamma mu x multiplied by d lambda x inverse multiplied by d lambda psi x, this is 0. Now you see d lambda x gamma A d lambda x inverse, you already have noted that this will give you lambda A b x gamma b, where lambda is the local Lorentz transformation. So this transforms in the right way. So I also require that what do I require? I require this to be the transformation, this to define the transformation law of gamma mu x, right, lambda A x gamma b, and you put a E mu A here, you are putting an E mu A here, and then you are putting a dou mu there. So this lambda A x can be this under a Lorentz transformation, your E mu A under a local Lorentz transformation, E mu A will undergo the transformation lambda A b x into E mu A. This is nothing but E mu b at x bar, where E mu b bar is the local Lorentz transformation of the contravariate. So this transforms in the correct way, right. That means that E mu A x under local Lorentz transformations will transform to E mu b x bar given by lambda A b x E mu A summed over A. So this is fine, but if you look at dou mu plus gamma mu x under a local Lorentz transformation, you can equivalently interpret, okay, you want this to go to dou mu bar plus gamma mu bar, right, to get the correct invariance. At a local Lorentz transformations, E mu A goes to E mu A bar, and dou mu plus gamma mu should go to dou mu bar plus gamma mu bar, where dou mu bar is same as dou mu, because local Lorentz transformations affect only the indices A, B, only the indices A, they won't affect the indices mu. Indices mu are affected only by diffeomorphisms, whereas the scalar indices A are affected by local Lorentz transformations. So you require simply that under local Lorentz transformations, gamma mu should change to gamma mu bar, so that d lambda x into dou mu plus gamma mu x multiplied by dx, d lambda x inverse, right. This is nothing but dou mu plus gamma mu x, gamma mu bar x. Just as in the Yang-Mills case, instead of the gauge group, I have a local Lorentz group here. So this is same as saying that your gamma mu bar x should be equal to d lambda x multiplied by dou mu d lambda x inverse plus d lambda x into gamma mu x into d lambda x inverse, right. This is what should be the law of transformation of the spinor connection of the gravitational field. Or equivalently, if you replace lambda by an infinitesimal Lorentz transformation, so I write lambda x as, say, lambda AB x as delta AB plus omega ABX, where omega A is a local Lorentz transformation, which is same as saying I lower the indices A, I write it as is equal to eta AB plus omega ABX, an infinitesimal Lorentz transformation. Then this is same as saying that what is D? Suppose you write the representation d lambda as e power the differential of the representation d acting on the infinitesimal element omega, where lambda is e power omega. Then it is same as saying that if you look at the transformation law, gamma mu x bar equals d lambda x. Okay, so so you have, instead of d lambda x, I put I plus omega x. I put I plus omega x, or I plus dd omega x, I plus dd omega x into dou mu plus gamma mu into I minus dd omega x. The inverse will become this because this is an infinitesimal element omega. So this is same as saying that gamma mu bar x minus gamma mu x under an infinitesimal Lorentz transformation, this change in the spinor connection is delta gamma mu x, right, and that should be equal to dou mu of omega x or dou mu of dd omega x you should have. So you should have, okay, let us just write it down neatly. Your spinor representation is defined by these quantities JAB, which are 1 by 4 gamma A comma gamma B, and these are the constant gamma matrices. These are the generators of the spinor of the Lie algebra of the spinor representation of the Lorentz group. So you can write down, if you take omega as an infinitesimal Lorentz transformation, then omega AB JAB, right, I call it as omega dot J, that defines the spinor representation, that is, this defines dd of omega, that is given by this, the spinor representation of the Lie algebra element, the spinor representation of the Lie algebra element omega. So you can see that lambda is replaced by e power dd omega, which is e power omega dot j, where omega is infinitesimal. So what you require is that I plus omega dot j, omega depends on x, omega x dot j multiplied by dou mu plus gamma mu x multiplied by I minus omega x dot j, right, that must be equal to dou mu plus gamma mu bar x, which is same as saying that delta gamma mu x, which is gamma mu x bar minus gamma mu x, the change in the spinor connection under an infinitesimal local Lorentz transformation. That should be nothing but omega dot j. So, here you have omega x dot j multiplied by dou mu omega x dot j with a negative sign plus omega x dot j comma gamma mu x. But of course, this won't count, right? It will be simply, this won't come here, this will be simply minus of this, because it is infinitesimal. Product of two omegas can be neglected. This will give you a term only I dou mu acting on this, right? You won't get any other term. Dou mu acting on I is 0. So, you should get this sort of a transformation, which is same as saying that delta gamma mu x, the transformation law of delta gamma mu x should be equal to omega ab comma mu x into jab plus omega abx into jab comma gamma mu x. So, you have to find out a gamma mu x, a spinor connection, so that under a local Lorentz transformation this will be the law of transformation of this quantity, and you can see very easily that such a transformation can be given by, such a spinor connection can be defined by, look, by using half JAB times EA nu EB nu comma mu. Look at this is also equal to half JAB EA nu E nu B double dot mu, where this is the covariant derivative. You can differentiate a covariant vector. So, how do you see this? Because under the local Lorentz transformation you have to transform the A index and the B index using lambda AB. So, if you transform it, you can check the identity of both the expressions on both the sides. That means under a local Lorentz transformation, your delta A nu, this quantity, will be nothing but omega AB times EB nu, right, and delta E nu B x will be equal to how much? You are transforming the B index, right, according to local Lorentz transformation. So, that will be omega AB or omega BAX multiplied by E nu A of x, right. So, if you apply the infinitesimal to this and the infinitesimal to this, you can show why is this equal to the covariant derivative? You just calculate and see JAB EA nu multiplied by E nu B comma mu plus gamma nu alpha mu E alpha B. So, if you look at this term, the second term, that will give you JAB, then you are contracting with A nu, right. So, EA nu into E alpha B gamma nu alpha mu, and you can bring the index nu to the top, and here you can lower it down with the metric tensor, and you replace gamma nu alpha mu by G nu alpha comma mu plus G nu mu comma alpha minus G mu alpha comma nu. And you note the fact that JAB is Q symmetric with respect to interchange of A and B. So, if you look at this quantity, this is nu alpha, alpha is in the middle, nu and mu are interchanged. So, this is symmetric, this is nu alpha mu, E nu alpha, okay. So, nu and alpha, this is Q symmetric with respect to interchange of nu and alpha, because this is Q symmetric. So, if you interchange nu and alpha if you interchange keeping mu as fixed, will that change? Just check this. How do you check that the covariant derivative is the same? See, you have JAB nu A or EA nu, then EB nu double dot mu. So, this can be written as JAB EA nu into E nu B comma mu plus gamma nu how do you differentiate A nu double dot mu covariantly? If you want to differentiate, this is A nu comma mu plus gamma nu alpha mu A alpha, right. So it is nu alpha mu nu alpha nu alpha gamma nu alpha mu should okay nu alpha mu into E alpha B into E alpha B. So I can write the second term can be written as JAB EA nu then E alpha B I can bring the nu on the top, so nu then gamma nu alpha mu, this index comes down, so this is G nu alpha comma mu plus G nu mu comma alpha minus G mu alpha comma nu. Now you see JAB is Q symmetric with respect to interchange of A and B. So this whole term is Q symmetric with respect to interchange of nu and alpha, right. But if you interchange nu and alpha, you see here you have nu alpha mu, here you have mu alpha mu. So this should be a okay. It doesn't seem you can replace it, right. If you interchange mu here, if you interchange nu alpha mu, okay, nu and alpha, if you interchange nu and alpha, it will come out to be right. Nu and alpha mu and alpha. Okay, it should be. Let us try to write it in a different way. Let us look at JAB EA nu double dot mu EB nu. So can we replace this covariant derivative by an ordinary derivative? You can replace it provided you have JAB E nu B EA nu comma mu minus gamma alpha nu mu E A alpha. You pull out, you bring the alpha on top, bring this on bottom. So this is symmetric with respect to interchange of nu and mu, right. This is symmetric with respect to interchange of nu and mu, and but not with respect to interchange of nu and alpha. So I think you cannot replace this covariant derivative by an ordinary derivative, but you should note that if you have something like, let us say you look at delta EA nu, this is equal to omega AB into EB nu. If you take the covariant derivative of this one with respect to mu, this will not touch omega AB, this will be same as omega BA comma mu EB nu plus omega BA into EB nu double dot mu. So that is because since omega consists of local Lorentz indices A and B, they act as scalars, and the covariant derivative of a scalar is an ordinary derivative. That is why it will not touch this. So you can show that is indeed so you can use half JAB EA nu EB nu double dot mu as the spinor connection, and this is a tensor, right, because A and B act as scalar indices with respect to covariant derivatives, whereas nu and mu act as vector indices with respect to diffeomorphisms, right. Now you can show that this works. Another way to see this is that you require that the covariant derivative d mu of E nu A, that must be 0. A natural way to require for this a natural condition to put on the spinor connection is that the covariant derivative of the tetrad should be 0, just as the covariant derivative of the metric tensor with respect to the Christoffel connection is 0. So if you differentiate, if you say you write d mu acting on E nu A, first this is the covariant derivative with respect to the mu index. So if it will first act on the index nu. So this will give you E nu A comma mu plus gamma sigma mu alpha then E alpha A, right. That is usual Christoffel connection acting on the vector index, plus you should have a spinor connection acting on the A index. So that I will call back, that I will call as so it will be something like omega mn, or the spinor connection should act on this. So omega ba into E nu b, right. I require this to be 0, where omega ba is the spinor connection. Okay, it is the coefficients of the spinor. It corresponds to a the spinor connection, right. So if you invert this equation, for to calculate omega ba, you get the required answer. This is nothing but the covariant derivative of E a nu in the usual way. So E nu a double dot mu, these two terms represent this. The total covariant derivative is the sum of two terms, one the Christoffel vector covariant derivative, another the spinor derivative. So you require that this plus omega ba E nu b is 0, or equivalently if you multiply by, if you use the fact that E b nu into E mu b, this is delta mu nu. If you use this is same as saying that omega ba should be minus of E b nu into E nu a double dot mu, right. That should be the coefficient of the spinor connection, and if you take omega ab multiplied by jab, that should give you if you take omega ab multiplied by jab, that should be you should put a mu also here, right. Omega a mu you should put here, right. So the spinor connection is defined by omega a mu, ba mu. So here you get omega ba mu. So you get omega ba mu is equal to minus E b nu into E nu a double dot mu, right. Or equivalently, if I lower the index b and raise the index mu, what do I get? I get or don't raise the index, raise the index a as well as the index b. So you get omega a b mu is equal to if you raise the index a, you get minus E nu E a nu double dot mu into E b nu. Get this. So this gives you the spinor connection of the gravitational field. If you multiply omega a b mu by j a b, that gives you the spinor representation. This is the gravitational connection, spinor connection, and if you multiply it by the Lie algebra elements j a b, that gives you the naturally the spinor connection of the gravitational field. This is another verification. So the counter verification comes from the fact that the spinor covariant derivative, the vector covariant derivative using the Christoffel connection as well plus the spinor covariant derivative using the spinor connection, that should act on a tetrad to give 0. So that gives you the complete reasoning of why you use that form of the spinor connection of the gravitational field, half JAB into E a nu E b nu double dot mu. Can use this as a spinor connection. Now if you have a system of particles, let us say you have a cavity resonator inside which you put particles, electrons, positrons and photons. The electrons and positrons satisfy Dirac equations in Kerr space time, whereas the photons satisfy the Maxwell equations. So you get, let us say the Maxwell equations will be given by what? In Kerr space time they will be given by f mu nu root minus g comma nu is equal to minus j mu, which is the Dirac current, minus j mu, and the Dirac equation will be given by gamma a E mu a multiplied by I dou mu plus I gamma mu plus E a mu. Electromagnetic field and gravity both are present, m acting on psi to give 0. Right, this will be the Dirac equation, the Maxwell equation. What is the Dirac current that I should choose? How do you choose the Dirac current? First observe that the Dirac's equation in curved space-time can be derived from the Lagrangian. I can introduce an auxiliary field. So chi I take is the dual of the Dirac field, psi, another spinor. So I use x star, then gamma 0, gamma a. gamma 0 gamma A into E mu A. I put all the factors which give the correct Dirac equation. E mu A into I dou mu plus I gamma mu. I dou mu plus I gamma mu plus E A mu. I put everything here and then I put minus m. I put minus m into gamma 0. I multiplied by gamma 0 here and the whole thing acts on psi, right. The whole thing acts on psi, right. I choose this as the Lagrangian. So the variational derivative of this with respect to chi will give you the Dirac equation. The variational derivative of this with respect to psi will give you a dual equation for chi star. And you can see if I call your gamma 0 gamma A as the Dirac alpha matrix is alpha A. So I can replace this by alpha A here, right, and I call in place of gamma 0 I use beta, the notation beta, so that you put it in a standard notation. So if you take the variational derivative of this with respect to psi, what do I get? I get of course they are derived from a Lagrangian, so you should put root minus g. This whole thing is a scalar, so you should put an invariant 4 volume element minus g, so that the integral of this gives you a valid scalar. So what about the dual equation satisfied by chi? If you take the variational derivative of this with respect to psi, you will get minus I dou mu of chi star. Chi x star means conjugate transpose into E mu A of x into root minus g. Oh sorry, into your alpha A I have missed out. Okay, so I should first put alpha A and then E mu A and then I should put root minus g. Okay, this plus all the other terms are the same, right, plus chi star acting on alpha A, chi star acting on alpha A, then gamma mu plus E A mu minus m. So just let us write it down neatly here. The action function for the Dirac field, the Lagrangian for the Dirac field is a function of chi, psi and dou mu psi. Chi is an auxiliary field which is real part of chi x star alpha A E mu A. E mu A is a function of x, that is the tetrad, into I dou mu plus I gamma mu plus E A mu of x. Okay, all these things will come here and plus beta m minus beta m. So this acts on psi. Real part because the Lagrangian has to be real. If you take the variational derivative of this with respect and you put a factor minus gx, right, and if you take the variational derivative of the Lagrangian density with respect to psi x and put it equal to 0, what do you get? You get minus I dou mu of chi x star alpha A then E mu A root minus g, right, you get this, and you get apart from that terms like I plus chi x star alpha A E mu A multiplied by I gamma mu plus E A mu. These two terms, non-derivative terms, into minus beta m, okay, into root minus g equal to 0. That is the dual field will satisfy this dual Dirac equation. So from these two equations you can easily deduce the current conservation law. So it's just a simple idea. Suppose you have something like dou mu plus some gamma mu acting on psi, and you put, let us say, you have something like some vector field f mu of x, and you put, let us say, this is a matrix and you have chi star x. Suppose you have something like this, minus you can put, let us say, chi star chi star into some matrix M into psi equal to 0. Suppose you have this as the Lagrangian and you have two equations here. One, you set the variational derivative of this with respect to chi to 0 to get f mu x into dou mu plus gamma mu minus m acting on psi 0. You will get one equation like this. The dual equation you will get is minus dou mu acting on chi star, the variational derivative with respect to psi will give you this into f mu into f mu into chi star into f mu. Here you will get this plus chi star f mu gamma mu minus chi star m minus m equal to 0. So if you pre-multiply this equation by let us say you could have integer, if you pre-multiply this equation by chi star and if you post multiply this equation by psi and suppose you subtract these two equations. So dou mu of chi star into f mu, what do you get? If you subtract this these two equations, you get dou mu of chi star, you get dou mu of chi star f mu psi. All the other terms will cancel out. You will get simply this is equal to 0, right? Because chi star m psi will cancel out with chi star m psi on subtraction, and these two terms chi star f mu gamma mu and here you have chi star f mu gamma mu, they will cancel out. You will get a conservation law, right? So this is the Dirac current which you should use in the when you write down Maxwell's equations. When you write down Maxwell's equations in an electron positron field in curved space-time. So you have so you define the Dirac current J mu to be equal to the dual chi star into alpha A into psi into E mu A of x. Okay, then J mu you will get the conservation law, dou mu J mu minus G is 0 and the Maxwell equation will become f mu nu root minus G is equal to minus J mu root minus G. That will be the Maxwell equations in the within the cavity resonator in the presence of gravity. So you have three equations. The fundamental equations of the cavity are, if you take the gravitational field also into account, you have the Einstein field equations which say that r mu nu minus half r g mu nu is equal to minus k T mu nu of the Maxwell field. So T mu nu, the electric momentum tensor of the Maxwell field which I call T mu nu m plus the energy momentum tensor of the Dirac field which I call T mu nu d. And you have the Maxwell equations which are derived from these, which can be derived from the Einstein field equations. So gamma nu is equal to minus J mu root minus G, where J mu is the Dirac current which is chi star alpha A psi into E mu A. And then you have Dirac's equation itself in curved spacetime which I wrote down for psi as well as the dual of Dirac's equation for chi, and all these equations can be derived from a big Lagrangian which says that which is the Lagrangian of the gravitational field, also called the Einstein-Hilbert action, plus the Lagrangian of the Dirac field plus the Lagrangian of the Maxwell field, and the total action is L root minus G d4x. So the Lagrangian of the gravitational field is simply a constant times C1 times r root minus G d4x. Lagrangian of the Dirac field is using chi, using the dual field we had constructed it, and Lagrangian for the Maxwell field is minus 4 f mu nu f mu nu, and you should automatically it takes into account the interaction, but the interaction term between the current of the Dirac field and the vector potential in the form of J mu A mu, that naturally comes when you write down the Dirac action. When you write down the Dirac Lagrangian, you had a term like chi star alpha A, then E mu A, I dou mu plus I gamma mu plus E A mu. You put all these things and you put a minus m here and you put up psi here, right? Psi and root minus G. So you see automatically it has got a term like in this, like E times chi star alpha A E mu A into psi into A mu root minus G. So this gives you the Dirac current. This is same as minus of J mu A mu into root minus G, where J mu is the Dirac current. So this interaction automatically contains the coupling of the Dirac current to the Maxwell field, and you get everything. Now within a resonator cavity, when we try to solve these wave equations, you have to linearize. You assume that the gravitational field has been linearized, which amounts to saying that you linearize the tetrad around a background flat spacetime or around a background classical curved spacetime. So the perturbations in the metric field will satisfy wave equations, but given by the linearized Einstein field equations. The perturbations in the Dirac field solution can be expanded perturbatively. So can the Maxwell field be expanded, and you can calculate all the interactions. For example, if you expand the Dirac field as say psi d, you expand the Dirac field as summation psi n equals 0 to infinity in powers of the electronic charge, and you expand the Maxwell field A mu also in powers of the charge, let us say a charge parameter A mu n. So to 0th order psi 0 and A 0 will be given by their free solutions in terms of creation and annihilation operators of photons. The higher order solutions must be obtained by perturbatively solving the Dirac equation and the Maxwell equations simultaneously. And likewise for the gravitational field, you write down the metric tensor or equivalently the tetrad E mu A or E A mu. You expand this also in power. The first term will be delta A mu, the other terms will be summation e power n E n A mu n equals 0 to infinity, where E is some perturbation parameter, and you so to first order E1 mu will satisfy a linearized Einstein field equation, namely the wave equations, and the higher order terms will involve non-linearities in the gravitational action, and you can get that. You should note one thing, that the energy momentum tensor of the gravitational field is strictly not a tensor. It has been introduced so that the total energy momentum of the Dirac field, energy momentum tensor of the energy momentum tensor of the Maxwell field plus the energy momentum pseudo tensor of the gravitational field, the ordinary 4 divergence of this becomes 0. So how do you calculate actually the energy momentum tensor of the Dirac field? You have to calculate the variation of root minus G by delta G mu nu. You have to calculate this quantity, and the coefficient of this will give you the energy momentum tensor of the Dirac field in curved spacetime. And to calculate this variation, you can make many approximations. What you must do is you must calculate delta E A mu, because these appear in the spinor connection of the gravitational field as well as in Dirac's equation. You must express delta E A mu in terms of delta G mu nu. Of course, you must also calculate delta E mu A. Once you know this, you can get this. So you write simply, you use simply the fact that eta A B into E A mu E B nu is G mu nu. Now you note one thing, that the tetrad is not uniquely defined. You can have several factorization. So you can multiply E A mu by an orthogonal matrix and still get the same factorization, because this amounts to saying in matrix language that you are choosing a matrix E such that E transpose eta E is equal to G, right. So if you replace E by OE, where O is an orthogonal matrix, then this equation will become E transpose O transpose eta OE equal to G, and you can always choose an orthogonal matrix O such that O transpose eta O is simply eta itself, where eta is a Minkowski metric. You can choose several orthogonal matrices which satisfy this, because eta is of the form 1 minus 1 minus 1 minus 1. You can put, for example, 1 0 0 in an orthogonal matrix here and get through in the spatial indices and get through. So it is not uniquely defined. However, you can define a specific choice of the tetrad coordinate system, and if you take the variation on both sides, you get delta G mu nu is equal to eta A B into E A mu delta EB nu plus EB nu delta EA mu, you get this. So if you to proceed further to solve for EA nu, you make an assumption that these two terms are equal, right. So you choose your or you can choose, for example, if you choose this amounts to doing what? This amounts to saying that EB, if you lower the index A using the eta matrix, using the Minkowski matrix, this becomes EB mu delta EB nu plus EB nu delta EA nu, EA mu. This is delta G mu nu. So you can arrange matter so that these two are equal. For example, you can define it such that EB nu delta EB nu equals EB mu into delta G mu nu, G mu nu by 2. If you define it this way, if you define the variation of this, then this equation will be satisfied automatically. You can check that because delta G mu nu is symmetric with respect to mu and nu interchange, right. So you have one choice of the variation in the tetrad which gives rise to the correct variation in the metric tensor. So using this you get the coefficient of G mu nu. The Einstein field equations, what do they give? If you look at the variation of the entire action, the variation of the Einstein action is what? It is nothing but R mu nu minus half R G mu nu into root minus G into delta G mu nu. That is what it will give, and the variation of the Dirac action will give you L root minus G by delta G mu nu into delta G mu nu, right. The variation of the Maxwell Lagrangian will give you dou L Maxwell root minus G by dou G mu nu delta G mu nu. This is the total variation in the total action, the gravitational action, the Dirac electron positron action and the Maxwell action, sum of all these with respect to metric perturbations. And if you set this equal to 0, you get the Einstein field equations, provided you interpret this variational derivative as the energy momentum tensor of the Dirac field and this variation with respect to the metric as the energy momentum tensor of the Maxwell field. So you get the complete picture in this. Next time we shall discuss some approximate methods to solve for to perturbatively solve the interaction between light and matter, namely between the Dirac field and the Maxwell field in a background gravitational field in which you do not quantize the gravitational field at all. So I think I will stop at this point, okay. Thank you.